most people want to hear the story of how I came to Baba. I know that I'm always very interested in learning how people did. And in my case, I mean, I consider it quite extraordinary because I'm going to have to tell you a little bit about my background. Uh, I was born on a dirt farm. Actually, I was born in a barn, the basement of a dairy barn. I spent my very early years on a farm of one form or another. I moved all over Texas. But they were very, very, very hard times. And I I lived through the Dust Bowl. We were in Amarillo at that time, smack in the middle of the Panhandle. That really was an epicenter of the Dust Bowl, which was really and truly extra special horrible. I can't tell you. People don't know what that was like. And on top of it, you know, it was right in the middle of the Great Depression. And that was not easy. My parents were practically slaves. And I had a brother and a sister, both older than I. And I remember, and my father, one of the things he did was a tenant farmer, which is another word for feudalism. You know, you didn't rent the land, you worked the land for the owner and then gave him more than half of the produce, and you got what was left over. And I think of those days, and it's really and truly extraordinary that I met Baba. Because also part of my childhood was spent in East Texas, which is even more primitive than the other parts. And for instance, there were revival meetings in those days. There was no television. I didn't see a movie until I was about 12 years old. And no radio, nobody had a radio. We had crystal sets. A few people had crystal sets. But that kind of thing, you know. And the church was the social center of the whole area. And there were always revival meetings. Always revived. Everybody was always being revived. And I used to wonder just where did they go? And I was really very young then. And my mother played the piano by ear. Well, she also played, but she didn't, you know, she played by notes, but that was much slower. And I was the youngest of the children, and I had to sit in the front pew so she could keep an eye on me, an eagle eye on me. And she was up there on that old piano that had, I remember, orange lights on each end of the upright, and they put candles in there. And it was the kind of thing that we had itinerant preachers. Nobody could afford one to live in the community. And and I had to sit through those sermons. You know, fire and brimstone sermons, very, very athletic and screaming and, you know, watch out, you're going to be terror. You know, I was envisioning my doom when I was about 3 years old. And, but anyway, hymns were a big part of the revival meetings. I don't know if they have them anymore or not, I doubt it. Because with television evangelists and so forth, what do they need revival meetings for? But anyway, the preacher would say, Sister Hightower, we're going to have, you know, hymn number something. And she would thumb through the book. She never looked at it, but she knew them all by heart. But she would thumb through the book. She'd say, "What key?" And he would say, "Hmm," and she would go, "Bang," and off we went. And everybody sang with great energy and so forth. But what I'm telling you is I wasn't exactly a spiritual seeker. I didn't know what that was all about. And somewhere along in this, I don't know, I cannot explain to you, and this is the honest truth, where this desire, a very strong desire, I wanted to become a dancer. And I had never seen it. And not only that, I don't know where I came across the fact that there was such a thing as a ballet dancer. But I did somewhere, and I decided that was what I wanted to do. And if you can picture the house, which had never seen a coat of paint, it was a box, a square box that had 4 rooms. And it was the Dust Bowl, barren. There wasn't anything green within sight, practically. And I wanted to become a dancer. You can, in retrospect, and I don't often think this way, really and truly, but I just feel Baba's hand in that whole thing. Because as I'm going to relate to you how I met Miss Krask and then went into that Baba arranged that whole thing, that urge to become a dancer was specifically for me to meet Miss Krask so I would eventually meet him. I mean, that's about all I know about karma. But that's it. I think that is it. And okay, so eventually, and I sort of, how can I say? I wasn't a very good mixer. I was always on the outside, and I really was an oddball. And that was okay with me, really. But you know, what's the difference? Childhood is rough anyway, in contrast to maturity. Anyway, I never told anybody many people, you know, my secret desire. But when I was in my senior year in high school, in a town of 1,800 people, I met a woman from Albany, New York. Her name was Gladys Tyson, and she played the piano. And she had come to Texas to visit one of her daughters, not in Canyon, which is where I was. I don't know how she ended up there. Anyway, she had 2 daughters, and they were both in show business. And I was fascinated by that and very thrilled. I'd never met anybody that sophisticated. And I revealed to her my secret desire. And I knew by that time, I don't know exactly how, that you had to start young as a ballet dancer. And if you didn't start young, you could just forget about it. Well, I was already 17 or 18, something like that. And, but it didn't quell the desire. And I told her, and I said, I know it's impossible. There wasn't ballet training within 1,000 miles of, Canyon, which was 18 miles from Amarillo. And she said, well, I know of a place up in Massachusetts. It's called Jacob's Pillow. And actually, Jacob's Pillow is the oldest dance festival in America. And It was founded by Ted Shawn, and in 1938, I think, something like that. Anyway, she said, and when I go back home, I think they give scholarships because that was also part of the deal. I didn't have any money. And I'll see what I can do and I'll send you the literature. And she did. And I read the literature and I wrote to them and asked for a scholarship. And I did tell them that I had never studied. I didn't know if I had any talent or not, but I was willing to work. And that's true. I really was. I had grown up working. And I discovered later that a lot of people just didn't know how to work. To me, that is incredible to this day. But anyway, okay. So I wrote to them and asked for the scholarship. And don't you know, I got it. And okay, I graduated from high school. And with the promise to my parents that I would come home at the end of the summer, because it was only a summer deal, you know, the festival and the training and everything. And I went to Jacob's Pillow in May of 1947. And Jacob's Pillow is up in the mountains. I don't know what kind of footage it is, but it's heavy snows, so that the place had to be sealed and all the windows nailed up and everything like that during the winter, the theater and everything. And it was really a wonderful place in those days. A little bit different now. It's terribly, terribly commercial. It was not commercial in those days. It was only about dancing. That's all it was. And while I was there working, there were 4 scholarship boys, and that's when I discovered that some people don't know how to work. And I did everybody's work for them. Oh, well, anyway. Because I fell in love with the place, and I wanted it to look right, and I wanted it to be right, so there's a lot of work to do. And but while I was there, this rumor, or this undercurrent, started flowing across about this woman who had just been appointed the ballet mistress for ballet theater. And it was an American ballet theater in those days. It was just ballet theater. And part of the company was coming up to Jacob's Pillow to spend the summer, to be the resident company there. And she was coming up there to teach. And this woman's name was Margaret Krask. And they said she was, some kind of yogi. She sat up on a mountain and pulled galls through her nose and things like that. And I was a hick. I mean, I don't think they make, what is that sound? Is that rain? You're kidding. Really? Well, anyway, okay. Anyway, and they told me that she had just come back from India. She had spent years and years and years in India, and so forth and so on. Well, this lady finally arrived, and I talk about love at first sight. That was it. And it lasted for 45 years because I had very close contact. I was so fortunate to have very close contact with Miss Krask all those years. But, you know, I fell in love with her, and I felt even more in love with dancing when I began. She was my first teacher. So some of the people up there, suddenly everybody knew about this guru, Gooroo, because who had ever heard of a guru in 1946? Certainly not me. And they asked her about Baba, but no way, I was not interested in that part. No, I didn't want to have anything to do with that. I mean, I had had my dish of religion with revivals and what have you, and the baptisms in the creek and all that, and all the confessions, the crawling down on your knees and all that. No way, I don't want to know anything about that. Thank you very much. But she fascinated me. First of all, I've never met anybody with an English accent, and she had a wonderful one. And Miss Krask had wit. I mean, she wasn't just funny, she was witty. And she was completely charming when she wanted to be. And she was a genius as a teacher. And anyway, the summer came and went. And I had to go back because I'd promised my parents I would come back and go to college. Well, I went to college for 1 year, and while I was at the Pillow, I was offered a couple of scholarships in New York City. One was for a completely modern dancer. I can't even think of her name now. But anyway, and then the Arthur Mahoney and Thalia Mara had a school in New York, and they offered me a scholarship. And but I had to turn them down. And but I did my duty. I went a year to college and realized, even though, and you see, this is what killed my parents, I had a scholastic scholarship at college. And in those days, it was very different. Very, very different. A bachelor's degree really meant something. It's hard to imagine, but it did. And most people, my parents, if they had an ambition, it was that their children would go to college. They thought that was the key to happiness and heaven itself. They were mistaken, but never mind. That's what and since I had this scholarship, and I told them that I was going to leave home and go to New York to become a dancer, it really crushed them. But what can you do? That's what kids are for, I guess. And so I went to New York, and Miss Krask was not stationed in New York. She toured with the company. But when they would come into the city occasionally during the year, for the seasons in New York. And and also there were several people from Jacob's Pillow with whom I kept in constant contact. One of them was Ella Marks. Some of you may have known her. She did come to the Southern California, I think. Anyway, and another one was Renee Schneer, and so forth. But Ella is the one I kept in contact with most. And we would call Miss Krask up, and she would go to lunch with us, or she might go to dinner with us, and so forth and so on. And eventually, she left Ballet Theatre and went to the Metropolitan Opera Ballet School. And the American Ballet Theatre established a second company based in the Metropolitan Opera Ballet School. And I I got the job. That was 1950. Yeah, 1950. I had been studying, what, 2, 3 years, something like that, and got into I auditioned not for the Metropolitan Opera, but for Ballet Theatre, and got in. And so then I had even closer contact with her. And Ella did not come. She didn't audition. She was studying with someone else. And this relationship of Miss Krask, that I loved her stories, because that's what she did. And she always mentioned Baba. She never pushed him. And one day I was with Ella, and we met Miss Krask on the street, on 57th Street and 7th Avenue, across the street from Carnegie Hall. And Ella, I didn't know this, but had spoken Miss Krask about Baba already. And Ella and I, of course, between the two of us, we were just giants of intellectuality. I mean, you don't come across that very often. But when you're 19, what is it that you don't know? And anyway, we got along very well. And we met Miss Krask, and she was charming, and friendly, and this and that and the other. And then she turned to Ella and she said, "You'd better come and talk to me about Baba." And Ella said, Ella was from Virginia, and she had a very soft, beautiful Southern accent. And Miss Krask, with her clipped British, they were a pair. And anyway, then Miss Krask turned to me, and she flicked a switch, and this switch had charm on it. And she said, "Ella doesn't quite know what to make of Baba. What do you make of him?" Well, I turned a beet red, and I started sputtering, and I mean, that was the one thing on earth I didn't want to talk about. I didn't want to know, I didn't please keep it away, put it under the blanket, anything. And she said, "You'd better come and talk to me." And that was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, was to make an appointment with her, and I knew she was going to tell me about Baba. But I did, because I loved her so much, and she was so charming, etc., etc. So I went, and she hardly mentioned him. She did, but she didn't. I don't think I can explain this to you, but she fed me Baba by the eyedropper, literally. I mean, I meet kids who have read God Speaks from cover to cover, 3 times or 5 times. And when I think of the way she taught me, and she never mentioned the philosophy, she just told me the stories. And those stories are in her books, not all of them, but a lot of them. And they were wonderful, and she told me, and I loved hearing them, but I never told her that I had any interest in Baba. I wasn't dishonest, but I didn't have any interest in, it was all her. And I loved the stories, but she was a main character, and Baba was a character, and she told those stories. And then along came 1952. And I thought that all of her wonderful stories about India were, ancient history. I mean, what are you talking about? a spiritual master. God didn't come into the conversation in those days. Baba did not say that he was, I mean, at least publicly, until about 1956 when he made that speech, I am the highest of the high. But otherwise it was, he talked often about, if I am the one I say I am, and this and that and the other, but he didn't say he was. I don't know if you catch on to that, but anyway. But so 1952 came, and we were expected to meet Baba. I mean, people could meet Baba. And Miss Krask, I don't know if she said anything, but it was very obvious that I should meet Baba. And by that time, there were a few of the dancers. Miss Krask differed from many of the other, not many, there weren't all that many, but like Kitty, who had met hundreds of people. Miss Krask didn't bring that many people to Baba. I mean, she brought an awful lot of people, but it wasn't like that. And well, she told me once, she said, well, you know, Tex, I'm only interested in people who will stick. And, okay. And it turned out that by that time I was in the company at Met, and we danced in the operas. And Baba was going to see people only on one day. I believe, don't quote me, I'm terrible on history and accuracy and things like that, except everything I tell you is true. Don't worry about that. On May 17th, I think it was, and I think May 17th was a Saturday, and we were on tour with the Metropolitan Opera. The Metropolitan used to tour for about 7 weeks. And we went to Atlanta and Philadelphia and Chicago. No, we didn't go to Chicago. We went to San Francisco. Did we go to San Francisco? Anyway, a few of the bigger cities. And it just happened that on that particular day, we were on tour, and we were in Minneapolis, of all places. And Myrtle Beach, in those days, there wasn't any way to get there. There was no airline, for sure. And it took a couple of days by train and 3 or 4 by bus. And the only way we could possibly do it was to hire a private plane. Yeah. You don't know about salaries and things like that, but though by that time, I started telling, she had several people who had become interested in Baba, several of her students. But Baba made the stipulation, as he almost always did in my experience, that you can come if you have the money. But if you don't have the money, you cannot borrow it. Period. Well, there were 4 of us in the company, and we could, I don't say we could afford it, but we could scrape together the money. Imagine, you don't know, 4 gypsies hiring a private plane? Are you kidding? A big laugh. They won't take that, or the public won't swallow that. But anyway, Bunty Kelly, who was not in the Metropolitan Opera, but had studied with Miss Krask as a child in England and knew about Baba all since she was a child. She was our anchor in New York. And she did a lot of research and everything like that in those days. And she made a lot of the arrangements. But anyway, the thing is, we did find a company in Chicago, and we did hire a private plane. As it turned out, we did not have a performance that day. It was a travel day, and the company was moving from Minneapolis to Bloomington, Indiana. And the real catch after that was that we had a contract that said if you were on tour, you could not go beyond a radius of 50 miles of the town that you were playing. Well, we were a little more than 50 miles. So we had to get permission. And we felt that, well, we have to do this right. We don't want to step on any toes, and we don't want to go over anybody's head or anything like that. So we went to our immediate superior, who was our choreographer, Zachary Soloff, and he knew Miss Krask because he had been in ballet theater, and he knew her. And he said, "Oh, no, that garbage, no, you cannot go." And so we went from him to the assistant stage manager, and got a very similar response. And we went to the production stage manager, same thing. Then we went to the tour manager, and he said, "Absolutely, were you kidding? Oh, Myrtle Beach, where's that?" And so forth and so on. And it ended up the assistant general manager, and then there was only the last one, Rudolph Bing. Now, Rudolph Bing at that time was almost a household name. He had come from Glyndebourne, and he had taken over the Metropolitan Opera after it had been under the leadership of Johnson for 40 years or something like that. So he was a big splash. Even people who knew nothing, let alone care about opera, knew about Rudolph Bing. But one day, we didn't know what we were going to do because we had gone to everybody. And we didn't even consider going to him. I mean, Mr. Bing hardly spoke to the cast. Are you kidding? And so one Sunday afternoon, during a performance of Tristan and Isolde, in which we fortunately had nothing to do, the girls decided they wanted to dress up for a change. After if you tour in jeans for weeks and weeks, well, anyway. And the company carried a steamer trunk. We carried our hand luggage and daily luggage and so forth, but they carried a steamer trunk. And also we had to appear at posh parties and things like that, and occasionally. And the clothes were in those steamer trunks, so we had to go to the theater to dress. And we all went, and we all got dressed up, and there I was with these three broads, and they were all lookers. I mean, real lookers. Zebra Nevins, who looked a lot like Mayra. She had a heart-shaped face and a widow's peak and very dark hair, and she was very beautiful. And she was sort of small. And then there was Skipper Damon, Catherine Damon, who was a redhead with alabaster skin from Seattle. They're famous for producing beautiful skin. All you have to do is soak it every day in rain. And then there was Sura Gesbin, who was a big, tall, statuesque blonde with beautiful bone structure, high cheekbones. Anyway, and they got out, and they looked pretty damn good. And we were on one side of the stage, so we went on the crossover, creeping, I don't know who it was singing, Tristan or Isolde or Brunhild, somebody. Anyway, we tiptoed across, and we just got across, and who did we bump into but Mr. Rudolph Bean himself, with the assistant manager, the tour manager, the production stage, all the whole entourage was there. And we went face to face to him. He never came backstage. Are you kidding? Getting his hands dirty? But there he was. And I don't know what got into me. And I walked straight up to him and I said, Mr. Bean, could I have a moment of your time? And he, yes. He was Viennese. And I gave him the whole spiel. I know where it came from now, but I didn't know where it came from then. And it was pretty shocking. I told him why we were going and who Baba was. I mean, I didn't say he was God. I didn't go there anyway. I just said he was a great spiritual master. And he said, is this very important to you? And I said, well, it's the most important thing in our lives. And he said, well, of course you must go. Just like that. You must go. And all the flunkies fell around. But anyway, so we had permission. And don't you know, we got permission, and I don't know, the day after, the next day, something like that, I got a message from Miss Crash to call her. And I called her, and she said, Baba has changed the date. You're to be there on Friday. And I said, Miss Krask, it's not possible. And I gave her the whole story. She, of course, a whole story, and she understood it. Of course she did, you know. And she said, well, I'll see what I can do. And she was already with Baba. And she called, I got in touch with her, I don't know, I don't remember the sequence, you know, exactly what happened. But anyway, we spoke over the phone, and she said, Baba said that he will see you on the Saturday for 5 minutes. That trip, which laid us in debt for 6 months, you know, buying that plane and so forth, for 5 minutes. Okay, that's nothing now, and probably all of you would do it with the snap of the fingers. But that's not the way it was then. I mean, I didn't have any preparation. But that was not an issue. We just, okay, great, we'll do it. And you see, you've got to, I can't impress upon you how much I did not want to go. No way, I did not. I still didn't want any part of this. I did it out of respect. I had listened to Miss Crask's stories for 5 years. And she patiently told me these and she was always charming and wonderful, and we always had lots of good laughs and things like that. And I just didn't have the nerve to say, I don't want to go, even though I did not want to go. And there's kind of a difference in not wanting to go and I don't want to go. And I did not want to go. I don't know what the girls felt. It's very strange. We never discussed it. But anyway, okay. So the day, the 17th of May dawned, and we were billeted in dormitories in the University of Minnesota because the only theater they had was the auditorium of the university. And I was designated to get a cab. And I would get the cab and they'd pick the girls up at their wherever they were. We were not billeted in the same dorms. I opened the door and went out, and I couldn't believe it. They had a cotton wool fog. I mean, a fog like I've rarely seen one like that. You had difficulty seeing your hand that far away. And, the street lights had a little halo of orange around them. And and there was snow on the ground. It was only May after all. And there was snow about a foot and a half, something like that. And I go crunching down to the street and think, what stupid cab is going to be driving around in weather like this? But don't you know, one kind of came by. And he said, where are you going? And I told him we were going to this little private airport. And he said, I'm not going there, forget it. And drove off. And then, don't you know, another cab came. And he said, you're going to the airport? What for? You're not going anyplace. And I said, well, no, but will you take us? And he said, well, I'm not getting any fares anyway. So you might, and I said, I have to pick up some other people. And he said, how many? It's okay. But he said, I'm not getting any fares, so I might as well take you. So we did. But the way we got there was by my sticking my head out the window and looking at the shoulder where the light hit and saying to the left, stay to the left, stay to the left, you're okay, you can come over to the right. That fog was so thick. But eventually we got to the airport. And we had to trek across, because it was a private airport. We had to trek across a field in the snow. But we got there and we waited. And there was a guy in that little hut that his jaw dropped when we walked in. He knew who we were because we were supposed to be there. But he said, how the hell did you get here? Anyway, so forth. It was that bad. And so we waited and we waited and we waited and we waited because of the weather. And finally, Skipper and I decided we'd take a little walk because we were tired of sitting there. And we did. And suddenly Skipper stopped. And she stared in ahead of her. And I looked and I said, what's she looking? And sure enough, this man materialized out of the mist. And he walked up and he said, are you Mr. Hightower? And I said, yes. Who are you? And he said, I'm Warren By, and I'm your pilot. And he had landed that blinking plane, and we hadn't heard it. I don't know how that happened, but it did. Okay, I was expecting a plane. I wasn't expecting an orange crate with wings, but that's what we got. Anyway, so he said, I can make no guarantees. He said, I flew in here on instruments, but I'm not allowed to use instruments if I have passengers on the plane. So I have to fly by visual this and that and the other. And the weather's very bad. And shall we go? And I said, yeah, why not? So we pile in, and three in the back, little cozy back there, and one in the front with the pilot. And he flew, and by this time we're way behind schedule. Because we had to be there before 5 o'clock, by the way. I forgot to tell you that. That was one of Baba's stipulations. He would see us for 5 minutes if we got there before 5 o'clock. So, and this was already past noon, and we were only in Chicago. And we got to Chicago, and we had to change pilots. I don't know why, but we were scheduled to change pilots. And this guy came out, and he said, "I'm not flying you there. The weather is so bad all along the eastern seaboard that I am not sticking my neck out to go to, Podunk, Myrtle Beach. So I'm not going to take you." And apparently that was legal, that if the pilot felt it was too dangerous, oh, look at that, the sun came out. Just like that. Amazing. California. Okay, so anyway, we get to Chicago, and Mr. Bai is standing there. And he said, "Well, I'll take you if you want to go." And we said, "Oh, yeah, of course." And he flew us the whole way. I don't know where this man came from. He was a real oner. Okay, so we started, and when I tell you that weather was bad, I mean the weather was terrible. Apparently it was the worst weather in 20 years. It was not snow, but it was a rain and wind. And we would fly and fly and fly and fly and fly. And I have forgotten all the places we had to stop and get gas because we spent all the gas in the tank. But I do know we landed 5 times. And this was supposed to be that we would go to Chicago, pick up a new flight, fly to Myrtle Beach, meet Baba, and then go to Bloomington, Indiana, just zip, zip, zip. Why not? I'll tell you why not. Anyway, we got as far as Louisville. And the Louisville weather was, and we were out of gas again, the 5th time. And all this time was being spent. And there was one time when Skipper was in the front seat. We took turns being in the front seat because it was really kind of squeezed in the back. And she was in the front seat, and Mr. Bai said, "Open that compartment." It was like a glove compartment. And she did. And he said, "Look for map number such and such and such and such." So Skipper followed it, and she found it. And he said, "Open it up, now, look for such and such and such and such. It ought to be around H9 or something." Something dawned on me. We're lost. Which we were, because he said, "Now look at such and," we found that. Skipper and I both looked at it, and we're looking, and he said, and we found that, and he said, "Is that to the right or to the left of such and such and such and such?" And that's when I realized he doesn't know where we are. But I had complete and total faith in that man, because every time we landed, he had to go to the control tower to get permission to take off, because everything was grounded except this little plane that Mr. Bai managed to get into the air. But we got to Louisville, and the rain was practically horizontal. It was so bad and nasty. Even though we had to get out of that plane, we were standing under the wings, and even then we got soaked. But he was at the control tower a long time. And he came out, and he had a rather sad face, and he said, "They won't let us take off." And we didn't say a word. And he looked at these three broads and turned around and went back. And he came back very shortly. He said, "Get in." And I knew we didn't have permission to take off. But he took off because he was the kind of man that didn't like being told, "You can't do this." Oh, yeah? And anyway, and we had no more gotten into the area than I realized it was 5 o'clock. And we were just out of Louisville. And also at 5 o'clock, and I'm not kidding, the weather opened up like the Red Sea. I mean, the most beautiful sunny day you ever saw, all freshly washed with the dew glistening on the leaves everywhere, and beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. 5 o'clock. The whole thing was for nothing because we were supposed to be there before 5. But, and Mr. Bye knew this. But he said, "Shall we keep going?" And I said, "Yes, keep going, where else?" Because, well, we didn't know what we would do. But we got to Myrtle Beach. I don't know why it was so dark. It was dark. That was about 8 o'clock, I guess, something like that. And because it was dark, I tripped over a little wire. That's how I remember it was dark. And I was to call Mrs. Houston, who ran a hotel in Myrtle Beach at that time. It was a real Tennessee Williams hotel. It was a square box, wooden structure with a veranda on the second floor and a veranda on the ground floor, and 16-foot ceilings. It was incredible. But anyway, I called her on the phone, and this hysterical, I said, "I'm Tex Hightower. Are you Mrs. Houston?" And she was hysterical. And I said, "What is wrong with this woman?" And she said, you're to come here and spend the night, and Baba will see you the first thing tomorrow morning." Well, that was unexpected. And that's what we did. And at 7 o'clock the next morning, Sarosh, that's the only time I met Sarosh, whom Miss Crass called Sarosh. And I like that better. But anyway, he came and he picked us up. And we drove from Myrtle Beach Center to the center. And in those days, if you can imagine, it's hard for me even. There was nothing between Myrtle Beach and the center, but completely like this. Absolutely wild land, and rather beautiful in its way. And the center had a gate, had that green gate, and we passed it. It was so inconspicuous in all the other greenery. And we turned around and came back. Anyway, then strange things started happening. The minute we drove through that gate, this thing descended on us, silence. Silence like I have never experienced. I had never experienced silence as a presence. It's not just the absence of sound, it is the presence of silence. I mean, no birds singing, the tires on the gravel, no sound, the motor, no sound, completely silent. I was barely aware of it at the time. It only came to me afterward. Wait a minute, what the heck, where was the motor? Anyway, we drove. And in those days, there was, the cabins, the carriage house, and there was a circle. And the original kitchen was at that end, and this circle was in front of it. And this little circle had a little railing around it, about 2 that high. Baba forbade everybody to sit on it because it was full of chiggers. And he sat on it. But anyway, we drove around. We had to go around the circle. And we got to the original kitchen. And I forgot to tell you that I sent, in those days, the only address for the center was a post box number and a rural route number. But I sent a telegram to that address, a rural, box something or other, route something or other. And I had no idea if it would be delivered or not. But I got to the original kitchen and I opened the car door. I was in the front seat and I stepped out and I came nose to breastbone with Ronno, who at that time, she was very small. She wasn't tall at all. I thought she was about 8 feet tall because she said, "You could have sent a telegram." And I thought to myself, well, who's pinching her? I sent a telegram. And, and I thought, first Mrs. Houston, hysterical over the phone, and then this very tall, intimidating woman trying to intimidate me very successfully. And I thought, what is this? And then we walked around. And of course, that extension, the kitchen and the roof over the patio was not there then, just the original kitchen and the patio. And we came to that rear door of the original kitchen, and halfway there, I hear the, and it was Kitty talking a mile a minute. And we met at the screen door. And she said, "It doesn't matter how you take Baba, just take him." And off she went. And I thought, this is the cookie jar. Mrs. Houston, Ronno, and this woman. And I didn't know Ronno was Ronno. I didn't know who she was. But anyway, there we were. And then Delia appeared. Because Miss Krask was not there. Half of the people had already started for California. They had left ahead before Baba. And so Delia was very sweet, and she sat us on a little bench if the original kitchen is here, the patio is here, and this little bench is here. And it was a clear view of the lagoon cabin. And I believe, as my memory, it was Zebra, Sura, Skipper, and me. Okay. So Delia goes away, and then she comes back, and she takes Zebra by the hand. And Zebra walks down the path, and she vanishes into the lagoon cabin. And and I'm interested knowing what's happening in there. And all of a sudden, she explodes out the front door, sobbing like, "Oh, the world's going to end," and staggered off into the woods someplace. And I thought, well, Zebra's the emotional type. But, my neck stiffened a little bit. And the next one was Sura, the blonde, tall blonde. Same thing. Only she staggered off in the wind in that direction. Well, then it was Skipper's turn. And in my mind, I don't know if it was true, probably not. She was the most sophisticated one of us, of the women. So I was really intent to see what happened with her. And I don't know how long she was in there, but she comes out and she walked straight into a tree. Bawling like, there's no end. Well, by that time, I was practically, ossified. And Delia came, and Delia was crying. And I thought, oh, another one. But she and then she reached for my hand, and I didn't move a muscle. So she stooped down and she picked up my hand, and then she had to pull. And finally I got up, and I walked up that path, and it sort of went that way, and then it turned, and it faced the lagoon cabin. The minute we made that turn, I saw something white go behind the screen door. It was like a scrim. And I knew that was Baba. And for reasons unknown to me, I dropped my eyes and my chin. And I literally pressed my chin into my chest. I did not want to see that. Whatever it was, I didn't want to see it. And I stumbled up that path and that long flight of stairs. I think there were 3. And anyway, I got in and I stepped into the room and I knew Baba was there. But I could not look at him. And I just stood there, rigid. And I'm not prone to mystical experiences. How much do they cost? I'd love to have one, but I didn't. But this is what happened. It was a physical feeling that I was, like this, in something like a mummy case. I was completely encased in clay, like this. And for some reason, this clay began to crack. It started cracking between my toes and moved up to my knee, over the top, very slowly, and I could hear it crack. And over my head, right up the center, and down my back. And when it got to my feet again, the 2 sides fell out in one piece, like that. And when that happened, I looked up and I saw Baba for the first time. And the most beautiful creature on earth. You cannot imagine anything that beautiful. He was standing there in a white sadra, and his hair was down, and he had a smile on his face, like it was amazing. And it was so very beautiful. But anyway, he smiled, and then suddenly he opened his arms. And I stepped into them, and he embraced me. Well, my whole life is in that embrace. Nothing before or after has ever meant anything really. Doubt or hesitation that everything that happens has to happen. And that's that. And everything that will happen has to happen. Now, I can't explain it any more than that, and I certainly don't retain that moment of illumination or whatever it was. Um, but at that moment, I knew that unequivocally. And I was just blown away, to say the very, very least. I mean, I can't tell you. And then the first thing, and then Baba released me. And the first thing he said after, as far as I was concerned, he had just handed me the universe. And I could take what I could take. As much as I could grab, I could have it. But after that kind of generosity, he said, Baba is happy. In other words, that giving that kind of love, and that, that embrace was all love. It was nothing else. That made him happy. Even to this day, I think about it and I'm just staggered by it. And anyway, he sat me down and he, on a little bench on the side, in those days, the lagoon cabin was very sparsely furnished. Now it looks like Days Inn. But it didn't have any. It had a little table in Baba's chair and a little bench here and a little bench there, and that was it. Anyway, he pulled up another little bench, and we were almost knee to knee. So I had a clear view of Baba. And I looked into Baba's eyes, and they went on forever and ever and ever and ever. I don't know how to explain that, but I don't know if it's true. I think they were chocolate brown. And I think that Baba was about my height, which about 5'9". And his skin was very, very beautiful. It was very fair, but kind of honey-colored. And his hands, my gosh, you never saw such beautiful hands. And his feet were gorgeous. I mean, perfect, perfect. And he said, what did he say to me? Oh. I don't remember the exact, if you can believe it, I don't remember the exact words. But he said, you cannot know, or you don't know, or something, you don't know how much I love you. And that was pretty staggering as well. And he said something else. Well, it'll come or not. It'll come or it won't come. And then he got up and he walked across the room. And this is the only time I saw Baba in perfect health. This was 2 days before the first accident. And because not only did we not see him on Saturday, we had to see him on Sunday. And I believe the accident occurred on a Tuesday, I think. Are there any historians here? Well. Huh?
The 24th of July.
It was the 24th?
Yeah, it was in
Well, then it couldn't have been the 17th. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But I saw Baba. He put his hands behind his back. And mind you, his hair was down. And he was very, very slender. Not skinny, but very slender and sinewy. Even though he was in his, 50s then? Something like that, in his 50s. But he had his hands behind his back, and they were doing this thing that you may see in the movies when his hands moved. And I saw Baba do that so much, so often. His fingers would move. But there wasn't a hint of agitation or tension. It was just vitality like I've never seen or felt. It was like an electric current almost. And he strode with the very most beautiful pace from one wall, and he'd turn around and go back to the other, and he up and down many, many times. And he sort of looked out that little window, and then he would walk back and he would look out that window, never paid any attention to me, but his hands were behind his back, moving like that. And then he sent me away. And I went down by the lake. I don't know why. So we were in 4 different directions. And I started walking around the lake. And eventually, who was it? I guess it was Sarosh again. He caught up with me, rather exasperated and panting, and said, Baba wants you back in the cabin. And I said, okay. So anyway, somebody else had to go round up the girls. And we sat on a little bench in the lagoon cabin in exactly the same arrangement, Zebrasaur, Skipper, and me. And Baba did something. He stood in front of Zebra, and there was a window just above that little bench. And he looked out the window, but he stayed there a long time. And then he took like one step and stood in front of Sura and looked out. And the same to me. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I have no idea what these things mean, but that's what he did. And then he said and he pulled up a little bench and he said, I was with you in the plane yesterday. Now you must take me back with you. And then he sent us away. And we, Mr. Bai, we went back to the hotel, and Mr. Bai was just having breakfast. And we had a performance that evening in Bloomington, Indiana. And I had a principal role, and each of the girls had soloist roles. Because each of those girls led on a group of other girls as they came in from different wings in the great triumphal scene of Aida. Okay? And so it was a beautiful sunny day, and Mr. Bai takes off, and we ran into clouds, and then we ran into weather. And what can I tell you? We were grounded in Louisville. I mean, we were grounded. They were waiting for us. They weren't going to let that guy take off the second time. And so we said, oh my God, what are we going to do? It was raining cats and dogs with wind and bad, bad, bad weather. And we'll rent a car. It wasn't that difficult in those days, and I drove, and so I said, okay. So I went and I rented a car, and I came back and picked up Mr. Bai, and he said, you a good driver? And I said, well, I can drive. And he said, well, I'm paid to deliver you back to Bloomington, so I'll drive if that's all right with you. And I said, be my guest. Well, that guy thought he was flying a plane in that terrible weather. And what happens? We hit an army convoy at 15 miles an hour, And finally, Mr. Bai said, well, he knew we were supposed to be there for the performance. And he said, well, we have to do something. So we found, and it had a detour. Oh, what a detour. I mean, potholes 3 feet deep on a road that never saw pavement. Anyway, and he got us there, but and he found the auditorium of the University of Indiana. I don't know how, but we got there at the end to hear the applause for the end of the second act, which was where and we get in. I partnered the ballerina, and each of these girls led on a group of girls. And we walk into the stage door, and who is backstage but Mr. Bing? Because apparently that performance was a disaster. The guy who, my understudy, dropped her over from overhead lift. This is the part I like. The girls there were groups of girls, like 8 girls, following one lead girl. And one would be off going in one wing while the other one was coming in the other wing. And guess what? They came in and went out the wrong wings. Oh, they ran into each other, and it was just a melee on stage. But anyway, that was that. And I went up to Mr. Bing and I said, I'm sorry, Mr. Bing, but the weather was so bad. And he said, you knew this could happen. Well, I didn't know. I never thought, but he said, and I said, stupid? I said, yes, but you gave us permission. Well, the end of this story is that 2 or 3 days later, the opera was Don Giovanni. Don Giovanni, I think, has 22 scenes. And I had a little bit, not dancing, but Doña Elvira comes into an inn, and I am carrying her 17th century luggage. And I have a little bit to do with the innkeeper. So, okay. So on the scene 19, and everybody else has gone home, practically, there's a little dance in one of the scenes earlier, but scene 19, and I'm waiting in the wings with my period luggage, and Eleanor Stieber was singing Doña Elvira, and she wasn't there yet, and I sensed someone behind me, and I turned around, it was Mr. Bing, and he said, did you find what you were looking for? And I said, I don't know where this came from. I said, a great deal more. And he set his jaw. You could almost see the smoke come out his ears. He turned on his heel and never spoke to me again. Not that he had much opportunity, we didn't move in the same circles. But that is the story of how I came to, oh boy, I'm over time.
You're exactly on time.
I am? How about that? Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you.